Hello everyone. Today we'll be talking about elasticity of demand. As before, the video will pause when I expect you to take notes, so sit back and listen while I explain a few things to you. But again, have your pencils ready to take those notes. So here we go. All right. So when we talk about elasticity, demand can either be elastic. When I think about elastic, I think about rubber bands. And if demand is elastic, it can be very responsive to changes in price. So as the price changes, demand changes drastically with it. Or demand can be inelastic. In other words, it can be unresponsive to changes in price. If you think about that like a pencil, the pencil doesn't move much when you try to bend it. It takes a lot of force to try and break it. So inelastic demand means that even though the price changes, consumers the quantity that consumers demand doesn't change as much. There are four factors that influence the elasticity of demand. The first is the availability of substitute goods. If there are plenty of substitutes, that means demand will be elastic. So for example, say Coke goes out of there is a big supply and big decrease in the supply and production of Coke. There are other substitutes in which you might use Pepsi or Sprite or something else to take its place. But if there are few substitutes for that good, that means demand will be inelastic. So, for example, when we think about um, hamburgers or something like that, something that is tougher to replace, a demand is inelastic for that. No matter the price, people will pay more. Demand will be only slightly affected. When we talk about necessity versus luxury as the second factor, if it's a luxury item, demand will be elastic. If it's a necessity, demand will be inelastic. When we talk about luxury items, we're talking about things like Lamborghinis or Bugattis or whatever your luxury car of choice happens to be. As price goes up, right, demand shrinks greatly, directly tied with that price. But for necessities, things like gasoline and milk and things like that, the price tends to be inelastic. No matter the price, people will always be willing to pay because they do require milk and gas and things like that. The third factor is called the time horizon. If you have a longer time frame to adjust, demand will be more elastic. In other words, if you have time to plan for things, you'll be able to adjust that and put that into your budget. But if you need it now, demand will be inelastic. The more you need things, the higher demand will be, and the more you'll be willing to pay for that. Finally, you have the share of consumers' budget spent on a good or service. If you spend a large portion of your budget on a good or service, your demand is said to be elastic, or a small portion of your budget, it's said to be inelastic. So, if, for example, a large portion of your budget was spent on rent for your house or your apartment, but rent goes up greatly, that would affect your demand for the apartment. But if on the other hand, if rent is only a small part of your budget, maybe you have a mortgage where things are a little cheaper, demand could be inelastic. So even if your mortgage payment goes up only in a slight bit, you are still willing to be able to take over that house. When we talk about graphing these two kinds of demand, elastic demand means that there's a small change in price is a large change in quantity demanded. That's reflected here. We have a small change in prices, but when we go to quantity 2 and price 2, there's a huge change in the quantity demanded. This results in a flatter demand curve. When we talk about inelastic demand, a small change in price equals a small change in quantity demanded. So there we have a change in price here, but a change in quantity demanded that's relative to that, and that results in a steeper demand curve. So double check your notes, go back through the video if you need to, and once you have finished, please move on to the exercises on the back of this paper.